Nora told me at breakfast. She said it the way she says everything that matters, quietly, between bites of toast, not looking at me. Something feels wrong at school today. She was 9. She said it the way she'd say the milk tasted funny. Not dramatic, not performing, just reporting a fact from inside her body that she didn't have language for yet. I almost didn't hear her. I was standing at the counter sorting her lunch into the blue container she insists on, because the green one smells like Tuesday. I had my phone wedged between my ear and shoulder, half listening to a voicemail from my supervisor about a meeting I didn't care about. Nora's father, Kevin, had been dead for 2 years. Stomach cancer. Fast and total, the way they said it wouldn't be. I'd been doing mornings alone long enough that they had a texture automatic, efficient, slightly numb. Nora talked. I nodded. The car started. The day began. "Wrong how?" I asked, which was generous for a Tuesday. She shrugged. "Like the air is tight." I handed her the blue container. I told her the air was fine. I told her to brush her teeth. I drove her to Carver Elementary and watched her walk through the double doors with her backpack straps pulled too tight the way I'd told her 100 times not to do because it would hurt her shoulders. She turned once at the door and looked at me, not waving, just looking, like she was memorizing something. I should tell you what kind of mother I was. Not the kind in the movies, not fierce, not instinctual, not the kind who feels a tremor in the earth and snatches her child out of the crib before the ceiling falls. I was the kind who signed permission slips late, who forgot pajama day, who once sent Nora to school with a lunch that was just a banana and 6 crackers because I'd cried in the shower too long that morning and ran out of time. I loved her with my whole chest. But I wasn't sharp. I wasn't fast. I didn't trust myself the way good mothers in stories trust themselves. When Nora said something felt wrong, the voice in my head, the honest one, said, "She's anxious. She's Kevin's daughter. She inherited his catastrophic thinking. Don't reinforce it." So I drove to work. I parked in the lot behind the Washtenaw County Tax Assessor's office, where I processed property transfers for 11 years. I walked in. I sat down. I opened my email. The morning was ordinary, in a way that now makes me physically ill to remember. Margaret brought donuts. I ate 1 lemon-filled. Alan from mapping told a story about his dog escaping the yard. I laughed. I responded to 3 emails. I refilled my coffee. I thought about Nora's tight air and decided to call the school counselor at lunch to ask if anything was going on socially. That was my version of listening, scheduling a professional to listen for me. At 10:14 a.m., Margaret walked to my desk and said, "Something's happening at University of Michigan Hospital." She showed me her phone. A local news push notification. Mass casualty incident reported at UM Medical Center. Details developing. Police responding. I read it. I said, "That's terrible." I went back to my email. At 10:31, the second notification came. Multiple attacks reported across Ann Arbor. Residents advised to shelter in place. Margaret stood up again. This time, she didn't walk to my desk. She said it out loud to the room. "They're saying people are attacking people. Biting." Alan laughed. Someone else said something about bath salts. I didn't laugh. I didn't say anything. I was reading the notification again. And what I felt was not fear. What I felt was the specific, nauseating sensation of remembering something someone told you 3 hours ago that you chose to file under not important. The air is tight. I looked at the clock on my monitor. Nora was 7 miles away. I picked up my phone and called the school. No one answered. I called 4 times. Each time, the same automated message: "Carver Elementary values your call. Office hours are 8 to 3:30. If this is an emergency, please contact." And then I hung up and called again, as though repetition would produce a different result. Margaret was still standing near her desk, scrolling her phone with the speed of someone looking for confirmation that the world was still the one she woke up in. Alan had stopped talking about his dog. The office had that underwater feeling, everyone moving slightly slower, not yet sure if they were allowed to be scared. I grabbed my keys. My supervisor, Dennis, was in his glass office on a call. I didn't tell him. I just walked out the side door into a parking lot that looked exactly like it had 20 minutes earlier. Same cracked asphalt, same puddle near the handicap spot, same faded bumper sticker on the Subaru 2 spaces from mine. The sky was clear. There were birds. I remember the birds specifically because I thought about them later, how they were still doing their thing while everything under them was ending. I drove Jackson Road toward the school. Normal traffic for the first 2 miles. Then a slowdown near the Maple Road intersection that I assumed was construction until I saw 3 police cruisers blocking the eastbound lane, lights on, officers out of their vehicles pointing people into a U-turn. I rolled my window down. A young officer, maybe 25, walked to my car and said, "Road's closed past Wagner, ma'am. You'll need to turn around." "My daughter's at Carver Elementary," I said. "We're advising everyone to return home and wait for official communication." "My daughter is at the school." "Ma'am, the school district has activated its emergency protocol. Students are being held in a secure—" "Have you talked to Carver? Has anyone confirmed with Carver specifically?" He hadn't. I could see it in his face. The very brief fracture where the script he'd been given ran out, and the actual human underneath looked at me with an honesty that terrified me more than anything he could have said. He didn't know. Nobody had confirmed anything with anybody. The phrase emergency protocol was a sound that meant we are doing the thing we practiced and hoping the practice was enough. I turned around. I took Stadium Boulevard south, then cut through the neighborhood streets I knew from years of avoiding construction traffic, past the Presbyterian church, past the house with the permanently inflated Santa Claus on the lawn, past the park where Nora learned to pump her legs on the swings by herself, one Tuesday in September, screaming, "Mom, look." Mom, look, while I sat on the bench feeling something close to joy. I was on Pauline when I saw the first one. A man, mid-40s, wearing a hospital gown. He was walking across someone's lawn with a gait that looked like a stroke patient's stiff left leg, dragging right arm, head tilted at an angle that made his neck look broken. There was blood on the gown. Not a little. The entire front was a dark, wet stain that had soaked through and was dripping onto the grass. He wasn't walking toward anything. He was walking the way water moves when the ground slopes, just going where the grade took him. I slowed down. Not because I was curious, because he was in the road. He turned when my engine noise reached him, and I saw his face. I will not describe it in the way you expect. There was no movie monster revelation. What I saw was a person whose eyes were open and whose face was doing nothing. No pain, no confusion, no recognition. A human face with the human removed. Like a house with the lights off and the door open and something wrong with the air inside. I went around him. My hands were shaking. I turned onto Nora's street and drove to the school. The parking lot was full. Not with the usual pickup line SUVs with random cars, parked diagonally, doors open, engines still running. I counted 6 vehicles with nobody inside them. The double doors to the school's main entrance were propped open with a traffic cone, and from inside the building, I could hear something I didn't recognize at first because I'd never heard it in that context. It was the sound of an adult screaming at children to be quiet. I ran inside. The hallway smelled like floor cleaner, and something under it, something metallic that I didn't identify yet. The screaming was coming from the gymnasium, which was to the left of the main office. Down the hall past the mural the 5th graders painted last spring. A woman I didn't recognize was standing at the gymnasium doors, with both arms spread wide, holding the push bars shut. She wasn't staff, she was a parent. I could tell because she was wearing the same desperate, underdressed, I came straight from wherever look I was wearing. "Are the kids in there?" I asked. Most of them. She was breathing in shallow pulls. "Mrs. Aldana moved them in about 30 minutes ago. They locked down. It's the protocol, says gym or classrooms. And the classrooms are some of the classrooms are. My daughter is Nora Carlin, 3rd grade, Mrs. Okafor's class. I don't know who's where. They won't open the door." She told me her name was Val. She had a son in 1st grade. She'd arrived 12 minutes before me and found what I found: the parking lot abandoned, the front doors open, and the school running on whatever adrenaline the teachers had left. She said 2 staff members had been hurt. She didn't say how. She said the West Wing was locked and nobody was answering from inside it. She said the principal, Dr. Keene, had been on the PA system once, maybe 15 minutes ago, saying shelter in place, help is coming. And then nothing. I banged on the gymnasium door. "This is Maya Carlin. My daughter Nora is in Mrs. Okafor's 3rd grade. I need to know if she's in there." Silence. Then a woman's voice, muffled. "Mrs. Carlin, we are in lockdown. I cannot open this door." "I'm not asking you to open it. I'm asking if my daughter is in there." A pause that lasted long enough for me to feel my heartbeat in my ears. "Mrs. Okafor's class is here. Nora is here. She's safe." I put my hands on the door and pressed my forehead against the metal. The relief was so violent, it made my knees give. Val caught my arm. "Okay," she said. "Okay, she's in there. Now we need to figure out what we're doing out here." What we were doing out here. That was the question. Because the hallway was wrong. Not just empty wrong the way Nora's tight air was wrong, in a way I couldn't explain by pointing at any one thing. The lights were on. The posters were on the walls. But the main office door was open, and the office was empty. And on the floor behind the reception desk, there was a cell phone with a cracked screen, still ringing. I could hear it from the hall. It rang and rang, and then it rang, and nobody picked it up. I walked toward the West Wing. Val followed me, which I didn't ask her to do and was grateful for. The hallway past the office led to the primary classroom's kindergarten through 2nd grade. The first 2 doors were closed and locked, windows papered over from inside. Standard lockdown. The 3rd door was closed, but the window was broken. Not from outside, from inside. Something had hit the reinforced glass hard enough to spiderweb it. And there was a smear on the inside surface that I refused to identify. I heard a small voice. Not from behind a door, from the supply closet next to the music room. A tiny voice saying, "Hello? Hello?" The way a child says it when they don't know if they're talking to the dark or to someone who can help. I opened the closet. A boy, maybe 6, sitting on the floor between stacked reams of paper and a broken music stand. He was holding his own knees. His shoes were untied. He looked up at me with a face that had passed through terror into the blank calm on the other side of it. The look children get when they've been scared so long their bodies gave up processing it and went somewhere quiet inside. "Hey," I said. "I'm Maya. What's your name?" "Eli." "Eli, are you hurt?" He shook his head. Then he said, "Mrs. Dreher told us to hide, and she went into the hall, and she didn't come back." Val made a sound behind me, a small, involuntary intake of breath. I reached my hand out. Eli took it. His fingers were cold. I pulled him out of the closet and picked him up, and he put his arms around my neck immediately, without hesitation, with the total trust of a child who has decided that any adult is better than the closet. I was now holding someone else's son, and my own daughter was safe behind a locked door 30 yards away. And the hallway between us contained something I hadn't yet been asked to understand. We went back to the gymnasium. Val talked to Eli in a low voice while I banged on the door again, and explained that we had a student, a first grader, Eli, no last name yet, no visible injuries, found in the West Wing supply closet. The voice inside a teacher, not the one from before, asked Eli to say his teacher's name. "Mrs. Dreher," he said. A pause. Then the door opened 6 inches, and a hand reached out and pulled Eli through the gap, and the door sealed shut again. The whole exchange took 4 seconds. In those 4 seconds, I saw the gymnasium. 200 children on the floor, seated in rows, some crying, some absolutely still, and maybe a dozen adults, teachers, aides, a custodian I recognized, standing along the walls like sentries. I did not see Nora. The door closed before I could look. Val and I stood in the hallway. "We should go in," she said. "They won't let us. We're parents. Our children are in there. And the door is locked from inside, and the teacher who opened it just pulled a child through a 6-inch gap like she was afraid of what might come in with him." Val stared at me. Then she looked at the West Wing hallway behind us, the one with the broken window. "What happened down there?" I didn't answer because I didn't know, and because the part of me that had decided to stop investigating was the same part that had driven past the man in the hospital gown without stopping. The calculating part. The part that counts. My daughter was accounted for. There were other children in classrooms I hadn't checked, other closets I hadn't opened, other voices I could have heard if I'd kept walking. I chose not to keep walking. I need you to know that before anything else. I chose the door my daughter was behind, and I stopped. Val didn't stop. She went back down the West Wing hallway. I watched her turn the corner and disappear. I stayed at the gymnasium door, pressing my palm against the metal as though I could feel Nora's heat through it. The hallway was quiet. The ringing phone in the office had finally stopped. The building's HVAC system hummed its constant industrial note, the sound of a school being a school even after it had stopped. My phone buzzed. A text from Margaret. "Office evacuating. Where are you?" I typed. "At Nora's school. She's okay. Are you safe?" 3 dots. Then, "Going to Mark's. Alan is driving. News says military coming. Be careful, Maya." I looked at the text and thought about Margaret's donut that morning, the lemon filling, the yellow dust on her fingers when she offered the box. I thought about how she always offered the box, every Monday and every Thursday. I thought about how I'd never once brought donuts myself. The gymnasium door opened again. A different teacher, Mrs. Aldana. I recognized her from back-to-school night. Short gray hair, reading glasses on a chain. She looked at me like I was a problem to solve. "Mrs. Carlin, you can't stay in the hallway. Let me in. You need to understand what we're dealing with. There are 214 children in this room and 11 adults. We have limited information. The district office is not responding. The police non-emergency line plays a recording. I've sent 3 texts to 911 with no confirmation. We are operating on the assumption that help is delayed, not absent. Then let me help. I'm here. I'm an adult. Let me in." She studied me with the specific scrutiny of a woman who has spent 30 years assessing whether adults are trustworthy enough to be near children. "Are you injured anywhere? Have you had physical contact with anyone exhibiting unusual behavior?" "No." "Have you been bitten, scratched, or exposed to bodily fluids?" The question hit me like a wall. She was screening me. At the door of my daughter's school, a teacher was running an infection protocol that hadn't existed 4 hours ago, asking me if I was clean enough to enter the room where my own child sat on the floor. I understood in that moment that the world had changed at a molecular level, and that the change had already reached the people whose job it was to protect children. No, I said. I haven't. She opened the door. I walked into the gymnasium and saw my daughter. Nora was sitting cross-legged near the bleachers with her hands in her lap. She wasn't crying. She wasn't looking for me. She was looking at the floor with the expression I recognized from the mornings after Kevin died. The focused blankness of a child who has decided to become very small and very still because the world has proven that large, moving things get hurt. When she saw me, she didn't run. She stood up, walked over, and pressed her face into my stomach without a word. I put my hands on her head and held her there, and felt the specific tremor in her ribs that meant she was crying without sound. I told you, she said into my shirt. I told you it felt wrong. She had. She had told me. And I had filed it under anxious child, manage later. And I had driven to work and eaten a donut and checked my email while her body had been doing the only thing it knew how to do. Broadcasting a frequency I was tuned to receive and chose to mute, Mrs. Aldana organized the gymnasium with a competence that I recognized as terror sublimated into procedure. Children sat by class. Teachers took attendance with clipboards. A custodian named Derek, thick arms, quiet voice, keys on a retractable belt clip secured the emergency exits and checked the windows along the upper wall. There were two other parents besides me and Val, who had come back from the West Wing white-faced and silent and gone directly to her son without speaking to anyone. A man named Craig, who'd been volunteering in the library when the lockdown started, and a woman named Priya, whose car had been blocked in the parking lot, and who'd re-entered the building when she heard screaming. The children were extraordinary. I don't mean brave, I mean precise. They did exactly what their teachers had drilled into them, sat in rows, stayed quiet, followed the hand signals Mrs. Aldana used to communicate across the room without shouting. A girl near Nora was silently braiding another girl's hair. Two boys were drawing on the floor with dry erase markers they'd taken from a whiteboard. The kindergartners, the youngest, sat in a cluster around a teaching aide who was reading from a picture book she must have grabbed during the evacuation. The book was about a bear's hat. I listened to her read it in a steady, warm voice while the world outside the gymnasium windows produced sounds I was learning not to identify. The 11 adults collected near the bleachers while the children were occupied. Mrs. Aldana spoke first. She was direct. The lockdown had been initiated at 10:22 when a parent arriving for early pickup attacked a staff member in the front office. The parent had been, she paused here, choosing language not responsive to verbal communication, and had bitten the staff member on the forearm before being subdued by Derek, who had used a folding chair. The bitten staff member, a secretary named Rosa, had been moved to the nurse's office. Derek had locked the parent in the front office. Within 10 minutes, 2 more incidents had occurred in the West Wing involving individuals who had entered the building through a propped-open side door. Entered from outside? Craig asked. From the parking lot? We don't know who they were. They were not parents. Where are they now? Derek answered. West Wing is sealed. I used the fire doors. Nobody goes down that hall. There were children in the West Wing classrooms, Val said. The room changed temperature. Mrs. Aldana said, Mrs. Dreyer's class and Mr. Polanco's class were in the West Wing. Mrs. Dreyer sent her students to the gymnasium before the situation escalated. Mr. Polanco's classroom is locked from inside. We have not been able to make contact. How many kids? Val's voice was thin. 22. 22 children in a locked classroom in a sealed wing with something on the other side of the fire doors that had already hurt at least 3 adults. Mrs. Aldana delivered this information the way she delivered everything, measured, organized, refusing to let the weight of it deform the sentence. But I saw her hands. They were gripping the clipboard so hard the plastic edges were bending. I looked at Val. Val looked at Derek. Derek looked at the floor. I had my daughter. Nora was beside me, holding my hand, alive and unbitten and whole. And 22 children were in a room I could reach by walking 60 yards through a sealed corridor. And I was doing the math. That's what I need you to understand. I wasn't deciding whether to help. I was calculating whether the risk to Nora, the risk of me not coming back, outweighed the obligation to 22 children who were not mine. That math is the thing I will carry for the rest of my life. Nobody said it. The silence after Mrs. Aldana's 22 was the loudest sound I'd ever stood inside. Every adult in that circle was running the same calculation. I could see it in the way their eyes moved, checking the distance to their own child, measuring the gap between what a decent person would do and what a parent would do. These are not the same thing. I learned that in the gymnasium of Carver Elementary on a Tuesday in October. Decency and parenthood overlap like two circles on a page, and the sliver where they don't is exactly the shape of those 22 children. Craig spoke first. He had no children in the room. He was a retired postal worker who volunteered because his wife had taught here for 19 years before she died, and he liked being near the books she'd organized. He said, "I'll go." "You're not going alone," Derek said. "I know the building. I know which doors open inward and which open out. I can get to Polanco's room through the music hall if the fire doors on the north side are still accessible." Derek shook his head. "I sealed those too." "Then unseal them." Mrs. Aldana intervened. She needed Derek at the gymnasium. He was the only person with a full key ring. Craig going alone into the West Wing was not a plan, it was a gesture. She turned to me and Val and Priya and spoke carefully. "I'm not asking any parent to leave this room. I'm telling you that I cannot leave 214 children to retrieve 22. And I cannot send our only custodian away from the only secured location in this building." Priya said, "What about the police, the fire department?" "I've been trying. I will keep trying." Val stood up. "I'll go with Craig." "Val, my son is in this room. If I don't come back, he has every adult here. If those 22 kids don't get help, they have nobody." I could feel Nora's hand tighten around mine. She was listening. 9 years old, sitting on a gymnasium floor, and she was listening to adults decide who would walk into a hallway where something terrible had already happened. I looked down at her. She looked up at me. Her face had the expression I'd seen that morning at the school door, the memorizing expression. She was watching me the way a child watches when they need to know what kind of person their parent is. I said, "I'll go too." Nora didn't react. She didn't grab my arm. She didn't cry. She squeezed my hand once, firmly, and then released it. Mrs. Aldana assigned a teaching aide, a young woman named Bethany, to sit with Nora directly. Nora walked to Bethany and sat down beside her without looking back at me. The control it took her to do that. The 9-year-old discipline of not watching your mother walked toward the door. Derek gave Craig his keys and explained the route. North fire door, through the music room, right at the T-junction, second classroom on the left. He drew it on the back of an attendance sheet with a pen that was running out of ink. He said the West Wing lights might be off. The electrical panel for that section was near the loading dock, and he didn't know if someone had tripped it during the chaos. He handed Craig a flashlight from the custodian's closet. One flashlight. For 3 people walking into a dark wing of a school, where the last adult who'd gone alone hadn't come back. Val and I followed Craig to the gymnasium door. Mrs. Aldana held it open for us. As we stepped through, she said something that has not left me. She said, "Bring them out, all of them." The hallway was the same hallway I'd walked through 30 minutes ago, but the quality of the air had changed Nora's tight air, except now I understood it. It was the smell. Underneath the floor cleaner and the old building musk, there was a chemical edge, an organic sourness, like something alive was becoming something else. Craig walked point with the flashlight. Val was behind him. I was in the rear carrying nothing, qualified for nothing, present only because a 9-year-old girl had watched my face, and I had needed her to see me choose the right door. That's the truth. I went because she was watching, not because I'm brave, because I couldn't bear to be the mother who sat down. The north fire door was heavy steel with a push bar that Derek had zip-tied shut from the gymnasium side. Craig cut the zip tie with a box cutter from the custodian's closet. The door swung open into darkness. Not complete darkness, the emergency exit signs were still lit, casting a dim red wash across the ceiling tiles, but the overhead fluorescents were off. And the hallway ahead had the quality of a place that had stopped being public. The mural on the wall, handprints in primary colors, each one labeled with a child's name, glowed faintly in the red light, like something from a dream about school. Craig swept the flashlight. The music room was to our left, door ajar. Chairs stacked, xylophones on a shelf. A poster of Beethoven with a cartoon speech bubble saying, "Practice makes perfect." The room was empty. We moved through it into the corridor beyond. The T-junction was 30 feet ahead. Craig slowed. The flashlight beam caught something on the floor near the water fountain. A child's shoe, small pink with a Velcro strap, lying on its side as though it had been kicked off mid-stride. Val inhaled sharply. Craig redirected the light and kept moving. "Polanco's room is second on the left," he whispered. "Past the bathroom." We reached the junction. Left led deeper into the primary wing. Right led to a dead-end corridor with the loading dock exit. Craig pointed the flashlight left. The hallway was empty. The classroom doors were closed. At the far end, maybe 40 feet away, the hallway terminated in a window that let in gray October daylight, giving the far wall a washed-out, hospital look. We turned left. First classroom door closed, window dark, no sound. Craig tried the handle, locked. He tapped twice on the glass with his knuckle and said, "This is Craig Weaver. I'm a volunteer. Is anyone inside?" Nothing. Second classroom, Mr. Polanco's room. The door was closed. The window had been covered from inside with butcher paper, the thick kind teachers use for bulletin boards. A thin line of light leaked from the bottom edge. Craig knocked. "Mr. Polanco? This is Craig Weaver, Priya Chandrasekaran, and 2 parents from the gymnasium. We're here to bring the class out." I heard something. Not a voice, a scraping sound, like a chair being moved. Then a man's voice, low and tight. "How many of you?" "3. Are you bitten?" That question again. That new question that belonged to the new world. "No," Craig said. "None of us." The butcher paper shifted. A face appeared in the window, dark-haired, early 30s, glasses, a cut on his left temple that had been butterfly bandaged, with what looked like a Band-Aid from a children's first aid kit, the kind with cartoon dinosaurs on it. Mr. Polanco looked at each of us. Then he opened the door. The classroom was intact. Desks had been pushed into a barricade in front of the window and the HVAC vent near the floor. 22 children sat on the carpet in the reading corner, arranged in a tight semicircle. They were quiet. Not the coached quiet of the gymnasium, the evolutionary quiet of small animals who have learned that sound attracts predators. A teaching aide, a young man I later learned was named Jonas, sat with them, his arm around a girl who had her face buried in his chest. On the floor near the barricade was a fire extinguisher, uncapped, and a pair of scissors. These were Mr. Polanco's weapons. These were what he'd had. "What's the route?" Polanco said. Craig showed him the map Derek had drawn. Polanco studied it. "The music room corridor? Is it clear?" "Was when we came through." "How long ago?" 4 minutes. Polanco nodded. Then he did something that broke me open. He knelt in front of his class and said, "Remember how we practiced walking in a line in the hallway? Hands on the shoulders of the person in front of you? We're going to do that now. We're going to walk to the gym just like a fire drill, but quieter, like mice. Can you be mice for me?" 22 heads nodded. Val was already at the door, watching the hallway. Craig positioned himself at the front of the line. Jonas would take the rear. Polanco would walk alongside, shepherding. I stood in the middle because that's where I fit, not leading, not guarding, just filling the gap with my body. The children lined up. Small hands found small shoulders. A boy at the front was shaking so hard his teeth clicked. But he held the shoulders in front of him and didn't let go. We moved into the hallway. 22 children, 5 adults, 1 flashlight, 60 feet to the junction, 30 feet to the music room, 40 feet to the fire door and the gymnasium on the other side. We made it 20 feet. The sound came from behind us, from the dead-end corridor. The one that led to the loading dock. A metal door banging open against a wall. Then footsteps. Not the shuffling, dragging gait of the man in the hospital gown I'd seen from my car. These were faster. Uneven, lurching, but fast, with a wet slapping quality that meant bare feet on linoleum. Jonas, at the rear of the line, turned. The flashlight was with Craig at the front, so Jonas turned into darkness and saw nothing. But he heard it. We all heard it. The slapping feet, and under them, a sound I can only describe as breathing turned inside out, an exhalation that had no pause for inhalation, a continuous rasping push of air. "Go," Polanco said. Not a shout. A command spoken at the exact volume that would carry to Craig without echoing down the hall. "Move them, now." Craig moved. The children moved. The line held. I still don't know how. 22 children between the ages of 5 and 7, in a dark hallway, hearing something behind them that their bodies understood before their minds could. And not one of them broke formation. They walked, hands on shoulders. Mice. I was in the middle of the line. I could see Craig's flashlight bobbing ahead and hear the footsteps behind. Val was beside me, walking backward, watching the darkness over the children's heads. Polanco was at the rear now, behind Jonas, facing the direction of the sound, with the fire extinguisher raised to his shoulder like a club. We reached the T-junction. Craig turned right toward the music room. The line followed. I counted heads as they passed me, a thing I didn't decide to do. A thing my body did because counting is what I do. I count things. I've always counted things. And in that hallway, counting was the only tool I had. 14, 15, 16. The footsteps behind us were closer. The breathing was louder. Polanco was still at the junction, holding the corner, giving us the seconds his body could buy. "Polanco," Val hissed. "Keep moving." 18, 19. The music room door was ahead. Craig held it open. Children filed through. I saw their faces as they passed me, pale, tear-streaked, lips pressed shut, holding their silence like it was the most precious thing they owned. A girl with pigtails. A boy missing his front teeth. A child whose gender I couldn't determine and whose eyes were so wide that the whites were visible all the way around the iris. 20, 21. The last child passed me, and behind him came Jonas, moving backward, and behind Jonas came the sound, closer now, at the junction, turning the corner. "Polanco!" Val screamed. He came around the corner at a sprint. Behind him, in the red emergency light, I saw the shape. One figure. Moving with the terrible, boneless speed of a body whose pain receptors had been switched off. It hit the junction wall, bounced off it without slowing, and came down the corridor toward us. Polanco reached the music room. Craig slammed the door. Jonas and Val braced it. The impact came 3 seconds later, a full-body collision that bowed the door inward and knocked Jonas back a step. Then another impact. Then a third. The door was solid wood, commercial grade, with a steel frame. It held. The thing on the other side hit it again and again, with a rhythm that had no intelligence in it, just momentum. "Through the fire door," Craig said. "Now." We moved the children through the music room, past the xylophones and the Beethoven poster, into the corridor, and through the north fire door, into the gymnasium hallway. I held the fire door as they passed. When the last child was through, I looked back down the corridor. The music room door was still closed. The impacts had slowed. I could hear it in there, hitting the door at longer intervals, like a wind-up toy running down. I closed the fire door. There was nothing to secure it, with Derek's zip ties were on the gymnasium side, and I hadn't brought any. I looked around. A mop bucket sat against the wall. I wedged it under the push bar and knew it would hold for exactly as long as something on the other side decided not to push very hard. The gymnasium door opened. Mrs. Aldana stood in the gap with her clipboard and her reading glasses, and her face arranged in the expression of a woman who has been counting seconds since we left, and had reached a number she'd decided would be the last. She saw the children. She counted them. I saw her lips move. 22. "All of them," Craig said. The children entered the gymnasium. The children already inside went silent, watching the new arrivals file in. And then a sound rose that I hadn't expected, a ripple of small voices calling names. Eli, Jordan, Sophia, children recognizing classmates. The sound of a school being a school, one final time, in the worst room, on the worst day. Nora was standing by the bleachers. She was watching the door. When I walked through, her face did not change. She had already decided I was coming back. The alternative had been inadmissible. She sat back down next to Bethany and returned her gaze to the floor. I sat against the wall and put my head between my knees and breathed. 20 minutes. That's how long the gymnasium felt like a solved problem. Mrs. Aldana integrated Mr. Polanco's class into the seating arrangement. Jonas checked the children for injury scrapes, a twisted ankle on a girl who'd tripped during the lockdown. Nothing worse. Priya distributed water bottles from the cafeteria supply Derek had stockpiled before the West Wing was sealed. The children drank. Some ate granola bars. The kindergartners returned to the bear book. For 20 minutes, the gymnasium was a functioning shelter, and the adults inside it could believe that function was enough. Then the parking lot changed. Derek was watching through the high windows along the east wall, standing on a folding chair. He'd been quiet since we returned, doing the thing custodians do, patrolling, checking locks, testing doors with the flat of his hand, as though he could feel structural integrity through his palm. He came down from the chair and walked to Mrs. Aldana and said something I couldn't hear. Her face tightened. She walked to the bleachers where the adults had gathered and spoke in a voice calculated to carry only to us. "There are people in the parking lot. Not infected. Living people. Parents, it looks like. Maybe 15 or 20. They're at the main entrance." Craig asked the obvious question. "Why haven't they come in?" "They're trying. The main entrance is locked. Derek locked it after the initial incident." She looked at Derek. "They're pulling on the doors. A few are going around to the side entrances." "We should let them in," Val said immediately. "We should find out who they are first," Polanco said. "Their parents. They're here for their kids." "One of the parents who was here for their kid this morning is the reason we locked down." Val and Polanco stared at each other across a gap that had nothing to do with the 6 feet of gymnasium floor between them. Val's position was instinct. These were parents. This was a school. The doors should be open. Polanco's position was experience. He had spent 45 minutes in a locked classroom because someone who looked like a parent had already walked through those doors and bitten a staff member. I understood both. I stood between them the way I'd stood in the middle of the children's line. Not because I had a better answer, but because the gap needed a body in it. "Can we see them from here?" I asked. Derek led me to the high window. I climbed the folding chair. The parking lot was visible at an angle. I could see the rows of abandoned cars, the open doors, and near the main entrance, a cluster of people. They were doing what I'd done 30 minutes ago. Pulling handles, banging on glass, shouting names. I could see their mouths moving. I could see a man carrying a child on his hip. I could see a woman in scrubs. "They look normal," I said. And then heard the sentence and understood how meaningless it was. The parent who'd attacked Rosa this morning had looked normal until the moment of contact. Normal was no longer a diagnostic category. "We can't leave them out there," Val said from below. "We can't screen them either," Polanco replied. "Not from in here, not without exposing the gymnasium." "Then we go to them. Open the main entrance, screen at the door, bring them through." "Who screens?" "I'll do it." "You'll screen for what? Bites? You're not medical. None of us are." "I'm a nurse practitioner," said Priya, who had not mentioned this before because no one had asked. The room recalibrated around this information. Priya stood. She was small, maybe 5'2", wearing a rain jacket over a t-shirt, and she carried herself with the particular stillness of a person who has spent years making decisions in rooms where other people are panicking. I can do a basic visual screen. It won't catch everything, but it's better than an open door or a closed one. Mrs. Aldana looked at her. "You're willing to go to the entrance?" "I'm willing to stand at the entrance and look at people before they come in. That's all a screen is." Derek said he'd go with her. He had the keys. He could open the main entrance, hold the door, and reseal it. Mrs. Aldana would stay with the children. Craig would hold the gymnasium. Polanco would hold the north fire door in case the mop bucket wasn't enough. I looked at Val. She looked at me. Neither of us volunteered. Our children were in this room. We had already walked the west wing. The calculation said stay. The guilt said go. The math and the debt canceled each other out and left us standing still, which is what most moral arithmetic actually produces. Derek and Priya were gone for 14 minutes. I know because I counted the ceiling tiles and lost track. And started counting seconds instead and reached 840, which is 14 minutes, which is the length of Nora's favorite song played 7 times, which is the unit of measurement my brain chose because it could not count in anything rational. The gymnasium door opened. Derek came through first, holding it wide. Behind him came people. Not 15, not 20. 31 adults and 6 children filing through the gymnasium door in a line that looked nothing like the children's orderly formation and everything like what fear does to a crowd given a single opening. They pressed through the doorway in clusters, couples gripping each other's arms, a man carrying 2 coats and nothing else. A woman with blood on her sleeve, who Priya was watching with an expression I recognized from Kevin's oncologist, tracking a variable that hadn't declared itself yet. Priya walked beside the woman with blood. She guided her to the far wall, away from the children, and spoke to her quietly. I saw her check the woman's hands, her arms, her neck. The woman was talking fast, shaking her head, gesturing toward the parking lot. Priya listened. Then she walked to Mrs. Aldana and said, "The blood's not hers. She was helping someone in the parking lot who was bitten. Her name is Denise. She's clean as far as I can determine, but I can't determine much." The new arrivals filled the gymnasium with a different energy adult fear, which is louder and more contagious than children's fear, because adults perform it. A man I didn't know was pacing the baseline, talking on his phone to no one, because the call wasn't connecting. A woman sat against the wall and cried, with the specific posture of someone who had been crying in her car for 20 minutes and had run out of privacy. 3 parents found their children, and the reunions were violent, grabbing embraces that frightened the kids more than comforted them. And then the ones whose children were not here. A man came to Mrs. Aldana with a photo on his phone. "This is my son, Anthony Berger, 4th grade, Miss Lou's class. Is he here?" Mrs. Aldana checked her clipboard. She checked it twice. She said, "Ms. Lou's class evacuated to the West Wing during the initial lockdown. I don't have them on my gymnasium roster." "Then where are they?" "The West Wing is currently sealed." "Sealed? What do you mean sealed?" The conversation radiated outward like a stone dropped in water. Other parents heard it. Other names were produced. Other clipboards were checked. Ms. Lou's 4th grade, Mr. Bardem's 2nd grade, Mrs. Kleinhen's kindergarten. 3 classrooms in the West Wing, locked down behind the fire doors, status unknown. Mrs. Aldana had been proceeding on the assumption that these classrooms were independently secure, locked from inside, following protocol, waiting for evacuation. She had not confirmed this, because she had not been able to confirm this. The West Wing was sealed and dark and contained at least 1 infected individual and possibly more. And behind its locked doors were approximately 55 children whose teachers had not made contact in over an hour. The man with the photo, Anthony's father, a broad-chested guy in a Carhartt jacket who looked like he worked with his hands, turned to Craig. "You went in there. You brought kids out. You can go again." "We brought out 1 class, Polanco's. The corridor was accessible then. We sealed it behind us." "Then unseal it. There's at least 1 of them in the music room. We heard it hitting the door." "1. You're telling me one of those things is between me and my son, and you sealed the door." Craig said nothing. There was nothing to say. The arithmetic was correct on both sides. 55 children behind the fire doors. 236 children and 47 adults on this side of the fire doors. Opening the seal to reach the 55 risked the 236. Keeping the seal protected the 236 and abandoned the 55. Both calculations were right. Both were monstrous. I held Nora's hand and said nothing. My daughter was beside me. My daughter was safe. Every word I could have spoken from that position would have been spoken from the wrong side of the equation. Val spoke instead. "We can reach the classrooms from outside. The West Wing has ground floor windows. If we go through the parking lot and break a window, we bypass the corridor entirely." The room went quiet. Val's plan was simple, which made it either brilliant or suicidal, and none of us had the expertise to know which. The West Wing classrooms had standard school windows, double-hung, single-pane, ground floor. If we could cross the parking lot, identify the correct windows, and break one, we could extract the children without ever entering the compromised corridor. The infected we'd encountered had all been inside the building. Nobody had reported any in the parking lot. The 31 adults who just entered had crossed the parking lot and survived. "That was 20 minutes ago," Derek said. "Conditions change." "Conditions are going to keep changing," Val replied. "And those 55 kids aren't going to be safer in an hour." Anthony's father, his name was Lucas, was already at the door. "I'm going. Tell me which windows." Derek described the layout. West Wing was the left side of the building as you faced the front entrance. 3 classrooms in sequence, windows facing the staff parking lot. Ms. Lou's was closest to the loading dock. Mr. Bardem's was in the middle. Mrs. Kleinhen's kindergarten was farthest, near the maintenance shed. 5 adults volunteered: Lucas, Val, a woman named Shanice, who said she'd been a Marine. A man whose name I never learned, who simply stood up and walked to the door. And Priya, because if the children were injured, someone needed to assess them before they moved. I did not volunteer. Nora was gripping my hand, and the calculus that had sent me into the West Wing hallway 40 minutes ago now produced a different answer because the variable had changed. The first time, I'd gone because Nora was safe behind a locked door with adults. Now the gymnasium held 68 adults, half of whom I didn't know. And the energy in the room was shifting from cooperative fear to competitive desperation. And I did not trust the room the way I trusted it an hour ago. Staying with Nora was not the brave choice. It was the parental choice. I have stopped trying to decide if they're different. Derek opened the main entrance. The 5 went out. The door closed. Derek locked it behind them. Mrs. Aldana returned to the children. She did what teachers do, she taught. She had the 4th graders take out their reading journals from their backpacks, and she sat on the floor and read a chapter of Charlotte's Web aloud from a copy she took from the library cart in the corner. The sound of her voice was the only thing keeping the room from flying apart. I watched a woman who had been managing 200 children since 10 o'clock in the morning, who had not eaten or sat down, whose hands trembled when she turned the pages, read about a spider writing words in a web to save a pig, and I thought, this is what heroism looks like, not the 5 people crossing the parking lot. This woman, reading this book, keeping this room held together by the sound of a story. We waited. 7 minutes. 12. I counted. At 15 minutes, a sound came from outside the West Wing wall. A sharp crack, then another. Glass breaking. Then voices, adult voices, calling out, and a response from inside the wall, muffled. They'd found a classroom. They'd broken through. 3 minutes later, the main entrance thundered with knocking. Derek ran to it. Through the glass he could see them. Lucas carrying a child, Val herding a group, Priya at the rear scanning the parking lot. Derek opened the door. Children came through. Not 55, 38. They came through the door in a stream of small bodies, some crying, some silent, some carried. Their teachers came with them. Just Lou, pale and limping, and Mr. Bardem, who had a tourniquet on his left arm made from a lanyard and a ruler. Mrs. Kleinhans was not with them. Kleinhans's room was empty, Lucas said. He was breathing hard. His Carhartt was torn at the shoulder. Windows were broken from the inside. The room was empty. 17 children. Mrs. Kleinhans's kindergarten class was 17 children, and the room was empty, and the windows were broken from the inside. Mrs. Aldana received this information standing up. She wrote it on her clipboard. She wrote the number 17 and circled it. Then she returned to Charlotte's Web and resumed reading at the sentence where she'd stopped. That was when I understood what was happening to her, and what the cost of this day would be for the woman holding the room together with narrative and structure and a voice that would not stop. Mr. Bardem's arm was the first crisis that forced the room to split. Priya examined the tourniquet in the corner, out of the children's sightline, and I watched her face cycle through assessment, conclusion, and the careful neutrality that follows both. She called Mrs. Aldana over. They spoke. Mrs. Aldana's eyes closed for 1 second. Then she opened them and walked to Derek. I was close enough to hear. He says he cut it on the window glass during the extraction. Priya says the wound pattern is inconsistent with broken glass. What's it consistent with? Mrs. Aldana didn't answer. She didn't need to. Derek's hand went to his key ring. He turned and looked at Mr. Bardem, who was sitting against the wall, cradling his wrapped arm, and who must have felt the look because he raised his head and met it with an expression, I will not forget it, the expression of a man who knows what is about to be said and has already decided not to fight it. There's a storage room off the gymnasium. Derek said. "The one with the PE equipment. It locks from outside." "You can't lock a teacher in a closet," Val said. She had returned from the extraction sweating, her jacket ripped, her certainty about every future decision visibly reduced by whatever she'd seen outside. "He's a person. He's conscious. He's talking. He's also not showing anyone that wound. Priya saw it. Priya saw it wrapped. She didn't see the edges." Mr. Bardem stood up. The room contracted around his movement. Every adult in proximity shifted. The involuntary flinch of people who had learned in the last 3 hours that standing up could be the prelude to something else entirely. He raised his good hand, palm out. "I'll go in the room," he said. "Lock it. It's fine. It's the right call." "David, I know what it looks like. I don't know what it is. Neither does anyone else. The kids don't need to find out in here." He walked to the storage room himself. Derek opened it. Inside were tumbling mats, a rack of basketballs, a bin of jump ropes. Mr. Bardem stepped inside and turned around and said, "If I'm fine in an hour, let me out. If I'm not, don't." Derek closed the door. The lock clicked. "Through the door, mister." Bardem said, "Tell my wife I went into the room on my own. Don't let them say I was forced." Mrs. Aldana wrote something on her clipboard and underlined it twice. This was the moment the gymnasium stopped being a shelter and became a society. Because Mr. Bardem's arm wasn't just a medical question, it was a political one. It established that there was a threshold, that the threshold could be enforced, and that the enforcement would be visible to every parent, teacher, and child in the room. And it established that the people making the decision about where the threshold fell were doing so without authority, without medical certainty, and without any mechanism to be held accountable if they were wrong. We had become a government in 90 minutes. Like all governments, our first act was to separate someone from the group for the group's protection. And like all first acts of government, it was both necessary and irreversible, and tasted like copper in the mouth. I looked at the woman with blood on her sleeve. Denise. She was sitting near the bleachers, alone. The parents near her had moved. Not obviously, no one pointed or spoke, but the space around her had grown by 3 feet on every side. An exclusion zone maintained by posture and averted eyes. Priya had cleared her. But Priya had also just identified a wound on a teacher's arm that didn't match his story. And credibility is a finite resource in a room where the cost of being wrong is everyone's life. Denise saw me looking. She didn't look away. She held my gaze with the flat, exhausted defiance of a person who has been measured by a room and found contaminated and is waiting to see what the measurement costs. I sat next to her, not because I was sure she was safe, because my daughter was watching. And the world Nora was going to live in was being built right now, on this gymnasium floor, by every decision the adults around her made or didn't make. "I'm Maya," I said. "I know," she said. "You went into the West Wing. I watched. How's your arm?" "Clean. But that doesn't matter, does it? Not in here." The afternoon became a country. Mrs. Aldana was its constitution. Derek was its border. Priya was its health department. Craig was its census. And Val and I were its uneasy citizens, loyal to the structure because the alternative was the parking lot and the dark wing and the 17 missing children whose absence sat in the room like a held breath nobody would release. By 2 o'clock, the gymnasium held 272 children and 53 adults. The cafeteria supply that Derek had stockpiled water bottles, individually wrapped snacks, a case of apple juice boxes was calculated by Craig to last until morning if rationed. The bathrooms off the gymnasium were functional but shared a plumbing line with the West Wing. And Derek reported that the water pressure was dropping. which meant something on the other side of the fire doors had damaged a pipe or left a faucet running or done something to the infrastructure that none of us could fix without entering the sealed corridor. Czernina. 3 more parents arrived at the main entrance over the following hour. Derek and Priya screened them. 2 were admitted without issue. The third, a man named Gerald, had a scratch on his neck that he said came from a branch while running through the hedgerow beside the school. Priya examined it. She said it was consistent with a branch scratch. Gerald entered. Denise watched from her spot against the wall. When Gerald passed her, she said quietly, "Only to me." Branch scratch, teacher's arm, my sleeve, everybody's got a story. You don't think he's telling the truth? I think truth is a luxury good now, and we're all paying retail. Denise was an ER nurse at St. Joseph's. She'd been driving to Carver to pick up her nephew when she'd encountered a car accident on Huron Street, a vehicle that had swerved into a light pole. The driver convulsing behind the wheel, a pedestrian on the ground, already being attacked by a second pedestrian who had the fixed, empty expression I'd seen on the man in the hospital gown. She'd stopped. She'd tried to help the person on the ground. The blood on her sleeve was his. His name was something. I never got it. I held his neck wound closed for about 90 seconds before the one doing the biting came for me, and I ran to my car. That's the story. That's the whole story. He bled on my jacket, and I left him. I didn't say you did what you could because I didn't know if that was true. And Denise didn't seem like a person who wanted to be soothed. I said, "Your nephew, is he here?" "Jalen, 2nd grade, Bardem's class. He came through with the extraction group." She glanced across the gym to where a small boy was sitting with his back against the folded bleachers, carefully peeling the wrapper off a granola bar with the focus of someone performing surgery. He hasn't spoken since they came in. I don't know what he saw in that classroom before the window broke. At 2:40, the PA system crackled. Every head in the gymnasium turned toward the ceiling-mounted speaker. The voice was not Mrs. Aldana's. It was not anyone's. It was an automated recording the district emergency system, finally activated, delivering a message that had been pre-recorded months or years ago for a scenario that the people who recorded it had never imagined would sound the way it sounded now. Attention. This is a district-wide emergency notification. All schools are under lockdown protocol. Students should remain with supervising staff. Parents should not attempt to enter school buildings. Emergency services are en route. Repeat, emergency services are en route. The recording played 3 times and stopped. The silence after it was worse than the silence before it, because it proved that the system existed and was functioning and had nothing useful to say. Emergency services are en route. To which school? From where? When? The message was a relic from a world where emergencies ended. Lucas stood up. I'm not waiting for emergency services. What are you proposing? Mrs. Aldana asked. I'm proposing we leave. All of us. This building is compromised. The west wing is sealed and whatever's in there isn't getting quieter. The water's failing. We have 300 people in a gymnasium designed for a basketball game. We take the kids, we take the cars that are still running in the parking lot, and we drive north. Drive north where? Anywhere that isn't here. The room split. Not violently, surgically. Lucas's proposal cut along a fault line that had been forming since the first group of parents arrived. The line between those who believed the building was still a shelter and those who believed it had become a trap. Val sided with Lucas. Craig sided with Mrs. Aldana. Priya stood between them, arms crossed, refusing to align. Derek said nothing. I stood by the bleachers with Nora. She was watching the adults the way she'd watched me at the school door that morning, memorizing. She had not spoken more than 10 words since I'd entered the gymnasium. She held my hand. She watched. The argument produced heat, but no light. Lucas wanted movement. Mrs. Aldana wanted confirmation. Val pointed out that the parking lot was navigable and the roads might still be open. Craig pointed out that 30 minutes ago, 5 people had nearly died crossing the parking lot. Priya pointed out that Mr. Bartum had been in the storage room for 58 minutes and had not made a sound in the last 20. That stopped the argument. Every adult in the circle turned toward the storage room door. The silence from behind it was absolute. "David," Mrs. Aldana called. "Mr. Bartum, can you respond?" Nothing. Derek walked to the door. He put his ear against it. He listened for 10 seconds. Then he stepped back and looked at Priya with an expression that delegated the conclusion to her, because he could not bring himself to say it. "Don't open it," Priya said. Lucas said, "We don't know. We know enough. Don't open the door." The gymnasium held its breath. Behind the storage room door, something shifted. Not a voice, a weight. The sound of a body changing position on a surface it was no longer choosing to inhabit. A tumbling mat compressing under uncoordinated movement. Then a thud against the door light, exploratory, like a hand placed flat against wood and pressed. Mrs. Aldana put down her clipboard. She put it down carefully on the bleacher bench, aligning its edge with the seat's edge the way she probably aligned everything in her classroom every evening before she left. She looked at the storage room door. She looked at the children. She looked at Lucas. "We leave," she said. It took 11 minutes. Mrs. Aldana organized the children by class, assigned an adult to each group, and designated a route from the gymnasium to the main entrance to the parking lot. Derek identified 12 vehicles in the lot, with keys still in the ignition or doors open. Lucas and Shanice went first, sweeping the lot, reporting by hand signal through the entrance glass. Clear. The parking lot was clear. The children moved in lines, hands on shoulders, mice. They filed through the hallway and through the main entrance, and into an October afternoon that smelled like smoke and cut grass, and the particular metallic edge that was becoming the signature scent of the new world. Adults loaded children into vehicles with a speed born not of practice, but of the absolutist cellular knowledge that the building behind them was no longer theirs. I carried Nora to my car. She got in the back seat and buckled herself in without being asked. Sat in the driver's seat and started the engine. In my rearview mirror, I saw the school, the double doors, the mural visible through the hallway window, the American flag still on its pole. Denise appeared at my passenger window. She was holding Jalen's hand. "Where are you going?" "North," I said, because I had heard Lucas say it, and it was the only direction. "Can we come?" I unlocked the door. She got in. Jalen climbed into the back next to Nora. I saw in the mirror Nora look at Jalen's face and then do something that broke me apart for the 3rd time that day. She took his hand and held it the way I'd held hers that morning. Without words, without performance, just the physical fact of one person reaching for another, because the alternative was not reaching. I pulled out of the parking lot behind Val's minivan and Lucas's truck, a convoy of 12 vehicles carrying every child and adult from the gymnasium of Carver Elementary, north on a road that none of us knew the end of. In the mirror, Nora's face was still. Not afraid, not calm, present, watching the road behind us with the same expression she'd had at breakfast that morning when she told me the air was tight. She'd been right. She'd been right, and I'd made her a piece of toast and driven to work. And when the air finally broke, when it proved her body correct and my judgment criminal, she hadn't said "I told you so." Released it and let me go into the hallway because she understood at 9 what I'm still learning. That the people you love will walk toward things that might take them from you. And that letting go of their hand is the bravest act you will ever be asked to perform. I drove. The road was open. Behind me, Denise was talking to Jalen in a low voice. Beside him, Nora held his hand and watched the shrinking school disappear. I still think about the 17. Mrs. Kleinhans's kindergarten class, the empty room, was escape or something else. And I never finish the thought, because finishing it requires a conclusion I'm not strong enough to hold. I think about Mr. Bardem, who walked into the storage room on his own feet and asked Derek to tell his wife he wasn't forced. I think about Mrs. Aldana's clipboard and the way she wrote the number 17 and circled it twice, and then read Charlotte's Web as though narrative itself could keep the world from ending. I think about the choice I didn't make. The second trip to the West Wing when Val went and I stayed. The 55 reduced to 38, and the 17 I let someone else's courage try to reach. I tell myself I stayed for Nora. This is true. It is also the truth that every parent in that gymnasium told themselves while other people's children sat in the dark. Nora doesn't talk about that day. She talks around it the bear book, the dry erase markers, the girl who braided hair. She is building the memory she can carry. I'm carrying the one she can't. She told me something felt wrong, and I handed her a lunchbox and drove to work. That morning is the unit of measurement for every morning since. I listen now, not because I'm braver, because the cost of not listening has a number, and the number is 17.